This episode of Sleepy is proudly sponsored by Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. If you've listened to this show for a while, you know how much I believe in eating well to sleep well. And Green Chef makes that so easy. It's the #1 meal kit for clean eating, delivering organic, fresh produce, responsibly sourced ingredients, and chef-designed recipes that just make you feel good. They have this special reset collection right now, which is super wonderful. It's full of meals that are lower in saturated fat, under 700 calories, and packed with ingredients that actually make you feel better after you eat. I'm honestly a pretty mean cook myself, and I was really impressed with their harissa chicken with apricot pan sauce. It was so good, it's so tasty, and it comes together in less than 30 minutes. And while I love elaborate cooking, it's nice to have something this nourishing without all the prep work. Green Chef really helps you stay on track during busy weeks with their grab-and-go protein breakfasts and those 5-minute salads. It's just a really great way to eat. So thrive all year with clean, easy meals from Green Chef. Go to greenchef.com/sleepyfree and use code SLEEPYFREE to get started with free salads for 2 months plus 50% off your first box. That's greenchef.com/sleepyfree and use code SLEEPYFREE for 2 months of free salads and half off your first box. I'll have a link for this in the description of the show. Eat well, sleep well.
Right now, the Home Depot has spring deals under $20. So no matter what you're working on, the deals are blooming at the Home Depot with savings on plants, flowers, soil, and more. Then light up your outdoor space with Hampton-based string lights. Was $34.97, now only $19.99. And get the grill going with 2 16-pound bags of Kingsford charcoal. Was $19.98, now only $17.88. Don't miss spring deals under $20 now through May 7th at the Home Depot. Subject to availability, valid on select items only.
Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy. A podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. Tonight, I have a story from L.M. Montgomery, who, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I really love reading. It's a great story to fall asleep to tonight. And before we get to the bedtime reading, I want to profoundly thank all of our brand new patrons on patreon.com, which is a website where you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of Sleepy. So, this week's brand new patrons: Troy Woodard, Christina Nyberger, Brittany, Lily Jones, Donna Bandy, Laura, Michelle Mendez, Martha Davis, Kristen Erickson, Rebecca E., and Peter. Thank you all so much for donating and being a part of making this show. It really, really means a lot. And for anyone who doesn't know, all the names that I just read, they are brand new supporters of Sleepy on patreon.com, which is a website where you can just directly support people who make the stuff that you like. So if you like Sleepy, maybe it's helped you get a better night's rest, then consider going to patreon.com and donating even a couple bucks. At $2, like I said, you get an ad-free version of Sleepy. At $5, you get access to our poetry feed, which has all kinds of readings you have not heard on the regular show. But even if you donate $1, any amount at all, I really, really appreciate it. And I'll read your name in the opening credits of the next Sunday show after you do. So, again, if you would like to be a part of making this show, go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Lepkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kanan. Tonight's story is by L.M. Montgomery, and it is called The Blue Castle. I really liked reading this story. I really like reading anything by L.M. Montgomery, really. And this one is, it's a bit more sullen than some of her other stuff. It feels very rainy, I would say. It's like, it feels like it kind of feels like the weather right now, at least the weather in New England and New York, where it's, starting to become summer, but it's still got that, like, chill rain and a slight, like, residual winter breeze, It's that, like, very, very end of bitter weather. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what reading this feels like to me. I'm like sitting by the window when it's raining, and maybe it's the last time you wear a long sleeve shirt or a sweater for the year. That's kind of what it feels like reading. Anyways, tonight, I hope you can sleep so soundly to The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery. And now is the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes. And let me read to you. Chapter 1. If it had not rained on a certain May morning, Valency Sterling's whole life would have been entirely different. She would have gone, with the rest of her clan, to Aunt Wellington's engagement picnic, and Dr. Trent would have gone to Montreal. But it did rain, and you shall hear what happened to her because of it. Valency wakened early, in the lifeless, hopeless hour just preceding dawn. She had not slept very well. One does not sleep well sometimes when one is 29 on the morrow and unmarried, in a community and connection where the unmarried are simply those who have failed to get a man. Deerwood and the Sterlings had long since relegated Valency to hopeless old maidenhood. But Valency herself had never quite relinquished a certain pitiful, shamed little hope that romance would come her way yet. Never, until this wet, horrible morning, when she wakened to the fact that she was 29 and unsought by any man. Aye, there lay the sting. Valency did not mind so much being an old maid. After all, she thought, being an old maid couldn't possibly be as dreadful as being married to an Uncle Wellington, or an Uncle Benjamin, or even an Uncle Herbert. What hurt her was that she had never had a chance to be anything but an old maid. No man ever had desired her. The tears came into her eyes as she lay there alone in the faintly graying darkness. She dared not let herself cry as hard as she wanted to, for two reasons. She was afraid that crying might bring on another attack of that pain around the heart. She had had a spell of it after she had gotten into bed, rather worse than any she had had yet. And she was afraid her mother would notice her red eyes at breakfast and keep at her with minute, persistent, mosquito-like questions regarding the cause thereof. Suppose, thought Valency, with a ghastly grin, I answered with the plain truth. I am crying because I cannot get married. How horrified mother would be, though she is ashamed every day of her life of her old maid daughter. But of course appearances should be kept up. It is not, Valency could hear her mother's prim, dictatorial voice asserting. It is not maidenly to think about men. The thought of her mother's expression made Valency laugh, for she had a sense of humor nobody in her clan suspected. For that matter, there were a good many things about Valency that nobody suspected. But her laughter was very superficial, and presently she lay there, a huddled, futile little figure, listening to the rain pouring down outside and watching, with sick distaste, the chill, merciless light creeping into her ugly, sordid room. She knew the ugliness of that room by heart, knew it and hated it. The yellow painted floor, with one hideous, hooked rug by the bed, with a grotesque hooked dog on it, always grinning at her when she awoke. The faded, dark red paper, the ceiling discolored by old leaks and crossed by cracks, the narrow, pinched little washstand, the brown paper lambrequin with purple roses on it, the spotted old looking glass with the crack across it, propped up on the inadequate dressing table. The jar of ancient potpourri, made by her mother in her mythical honeymoon. The shell-covered box, with one burst corner, which Cousin Stickles had made in her equally mythical girlhood. The beaded pincushion, with half its bead fringe gone. The one stiff yellow chair. The faded old motto, gone but not forgotten, worked in colored yarns about great-grandmother Sterling's grim old face. The old photographs of ancient relatives, long banished from the rooms below. There were only two pictures that were not of relatives. One, an old chromo of a puppy sitting on a rainy doorstep. That picture always made Valency unhappy. That forlorn little dog crouched on the doorstep in the driving rain. Why didn't someone open the door and let him in? The other picture was a faded, passepartout engraving of Queen Louise coming down a stairway, which Aunt Wellington had lavishingly given her on her 10th birthday. For 19 years, she had looked at it and hated it. Beautiful, smug, self-satisfied Queen Louise. But she never dared destroy it or remove it. Mother and Cousin Stickles would have been aghast, or as Valency irreverently expressed it in her thoughts, would have had a fit. Every room in the house was ugly, of course, but downstairs appearances were kept up somewhat. There was no money for rooms nobody ever saw. Valency sometimes felt that she could have done something for her room herself, even without money, if she were permitted. But her mother had negatived every timid suggestion, and Valency did not persist. Valency never persisted. She was afraid to. Her mother could not brook opposition. Mrs. Sterling would sulk for days if offended, with the airs of an insulted duchess. The only thing Valency liked about her room was that she could be alone there at night to cry if she wanted to. But after all, what did it matter if a room, which she used for nothing except sleeping and dressing in, were ugly? Valency was never permitted to stay alone in her room for any other purpose. People who wanted to be alone, so Mrs. Frederick Sterling and Cousin Stickles believed, could only want to be alone for some sinister purpose. But her room in the Blue Castle was everything a room should be. Valency, so cowed and subdued and overridden and snubbed in real life, was wont to let herself go rather splendidly in her daydreams. Nobody in the Sterling clan, or its ramifications, suspected this, least of all her mother and Cousin Stickles. They never knew that Valency had two homes, the ugly red brick box of a home on Elm Street and the Blue Castle in Spain. Valency had lived spiritually in the Blue Castle ever since she could remember. She had been a very thin, tiny child when she found herself possessed of it. Always, when she shut her eyes, she could see it plainly, with its turrets and banners on the pine-clad mountain height, wrapped in its faint blue loveliness against the sunset skies of a fair and unknown land. Everything wonderful and beautiful was in that castle. Jewels that queens might have worn, robes of moonlight and fire, couches of roses and gold, long flights of shallow marble steps with great white urns, and with slender, mist-clad maidens going up and down them. Courts, marble-pillared, where shimmering fountains fell and nightingales sang among the myrtles. halls of mirrors that reflected only handsome knights and lovely women, herself the loveliest of all, for whose glance men died. All that supported her through the boredom of her days was the hope of going on a dream spree at night. Most, if not all, of the Sterlings would have died of horror if they had known half the things Valancy did in her blue castle. For one thing, she had quite a few lovers in it. Oh, only one at a time. One who wooed her with all the romantic ardor of the age of chivalry, and won her after long devotion and many deeds of daring-do, and was wedded to her with pomp and circumstance in the great banner-hung chapel of the Blue Castle. At 12, this lover was a fair lad with golden curls and heavenly blue eyes. At 15, he was tall and dark and pale, but still necessarily handsome. At 20, he was ascetic, dreamy, spiritual. At 25, he had a clean-cut jaw, slightly grim, and a face strong and rugged rather than handsome. Valancy never grew older than 25 in her blue castle, but recently, very recently, her hero had had reddish, tawny hair, a twisted smile, and a mysterious past. I don't say Valancy deliberately murdered these lovers as she outgrew them. One simply faded away as another came. Things are very convenient in this respect in blue castles. But on this morning of her day of fate, Valancy could not find the key of her blue castle. Reality pressed on her too hardly, barking at her heels like a maddening little dog. She was 29, lonely, undesired, ill-favored, the only homely girl in a handsome clan, with no past and no future. As far as she could look back, life was drab and colorless, with not one single crimson or purple spot anywhere. As far as she could look forward, it seemed certain to be just the same until there was nothing but a solitary little withered leaf clinging to a wintry bough. The moment when a woman realizes that she has nothing to live for, neither love nor duty, purpose nor hope, holds for her the bitterness of death. And I just have to go on living, because I can't stop. I may have to live 80 years, thought Valancy in a kind of panic. We're all horribly long-lived. It sickens me to think of it. She was glad it was raining, or rather, she was drearily satisfied that it was raining. There would be no picnic that day. This annual picnic, whereby Aunt and Uncle Wellington, one always thought of them in that succession, inevitably celebrated their engagement at a picnic 30 years before, had been, of late years, a veritable nightmare to Valancy. By an impish coincidence, it was the same day as her birthday, and after she had passed 25, nobody let her forget it. Much as she hated going to the picnic, it would never have occurred to her to rebel against it. There seemed to be nothing of the revolutionary in her nature, and she knew exactly what everyone would say to her at the picnic. Uncle Wellington, whom she disliked and despised, even though he had fulfilled the highest Sterling aspiration, marrying money, would say to her in a pig's whisper, "Not thinking of getting married yet, my dear?" And then go off into the bellow of laughter with which he invariably concluded his dull remarks. Aunt Wellington, of whom Valancy stood in abject awe, would tell her about Olive's new chiffon dress and Cecil's last devoted letter. Valancy would have to look as pleased and interested as if the dress and letter had been hers, or else Aunt Wellington would be offended. And Valancy had long ago decided that she would rather offend God than Aunt Wellington, because God might forgive her, but Aunt Wellington never would. Aunt Alberta, enormously fat, with an amiable habit of always referring to her husband as he, as if he were the only male creature in the world, who could never forget that she had been a great beauty in her youth, would condole with Valancy on her sallow skin. I don't know why all the girls of today are so sunburned. When I was a girl, my skin was roses and cream. I was counted the prettiest girl in Canada, my dear. Perhaps Uncle Herbert wouldn't say anything, or perhaps he would remark jocularly, "How fat you're getting, Doss." And then everybody would laugh over the excessively humorous idea of poor, scrawny little Doss getting fat. Handsome, solemn Uncle James, whom Valancy disliked but respected because he was reputed to be very clever, and was therefore the clan oracle, brains being none too plentiful in the Sterling connection, would probably remark with the owl-like sarcasm that had won him his reputation, "I suppose you're busy with your hope chest these days." And Uncle Benjamin would ask some of his abominable conundrums between wheezy chuckles and answer them himself. What is the difference between Doss and a mouse? The mouse wishes to harm the cheese, and Doss wishes to charm the he's. Valancy had heard him ask that riddle 50 times, and every time she wanted to throw something at him, but she never did. In the first place, the Sterlings simply did not throw things. In the second place, Uncle Benjamin was a wealthy and childless old widower, and Valancy had been brought up in the fear and admonition of his money. If she offended him, he would cut her out of his will, supposing she were in it. Valancy did not want to be cut out of Uncle Benjamin's will. She had been poor all her life, and knew the galling bitterness of it. So she endured his riddles, and even smiled tortured little smiles over them. Aunt Isabel, downright and disagreeable as an east wind, would criticize her in some way. Valancy could not predict just how, for Aunt Isabel never repeated a criticism. She found something new with which to jab you every time. Aunt Isabel prided herself on saying what she thought, but didn't like it so well when other people said what they thought of her. Valancy never said what she thought. Cousin Georgiana, named after her great-great-grandmother, who had been named after George IV, would recount dolorously the names of all relatives and friends who had died since the last picnic, and wondered which of us will be the first to go next. Oppressively competent, Aunt Mildred would talk endlessly of her husband and her odious prodigies of babies to Valancy, because Valancy would be the only one she could find to put up with it. For the same reason, Cousin Gladys, really first Cousin Gladys once removed, according to the strict way in which the Sterlings tabulated relationship, a tall, thin lady who admitted she had a sensitive disposition, would describe minutely the tortures of her neuritis. And Olive, the wonder girl of the whole Sterling clan, who had everything Valancy had not, beauty, popularity, love, would show off her beauty and presume on her popularity and flaunt her diamond insignia of love in Valancy's dazzled, envious eyes. There would be none of all this today, and there would be no packing up of teaspoons. The packing up was always left for Valancy and Cousin Stickles. And once, 6 years ago, a silver teaspoon from Aunt Wellington's wedding set had been lost. Valancy never heard the last of that silver teaspoon. Its ghost appeared Banquo-like at every subsequent family feast. Oh yes, Valancy knew exactly what the picnic would be like, and she blessed the rain that had saved her from it. There would be no picnic this year. If Aunt Wellington could not celebrate on the sacred day itself, she would have no celebration at all. Thank whatever gods there were for that. Since there would be no picnic, Valancy made up her mind that, if the rain held up in the afternoon, she would go up to the library and get another of John Foster's books. Valancy was never allowed to read novels, but John Foster's books were not novels. They were nature books, so the librarian told Mrs. Frederick Sterling, all about the woods and birds and bugs and things like that, you know. So Valency was allowed to read them, under protest, for it was only too evident that she enjoyed them too much. It was permissible, even laudable, to read to improve your mind and your religion, but a book that was enjoyable was dangerous. Valency did not know whether her mind was being improved or not, but she felt vaguely that if she had come across John Foster's books years ago, life might have been a different thing for her. They seemed to her to yield glimpses of a world into which she might once have entered, through a door that was forever barred to her now. It was only within the last year that John Foster's books had been in the Deerwood Library, though the librarian told Valency that he had been a well-known writer for several years. "Where does he live?" Valency had asked. "Nobody knows. From his books, he must be a Canadian, but no more information can be had. His publishers won't say a word. Quite likely, John Foster is a nom de plume. His books are so popular, we can't keep them in at all, though I really can't see what people find in them to rave over." "I think they're wonderful," said Valency timidly. "Oh, well." Miss Clarkson smiled in a patronizing fashion that relegated Valency's opinions to limbo. "I can't say I care much for bugs myself, but certainly Foster seems to know all there is to know about them." Valency didn't know whether she cared much for bugs either. It was not John Foster's uncanny knowledge of wild creatures and insect life that enthralled her. She could hardly say what it was. Some tantalizing lure of a mystery never revealed, some hint of a great secret just a little further on, some faint elusive echo of lovely forgotten things. John Foster's magic was undefinable. Yes, she would get a new Foster book. It was a month since she had Thistle Harvest, so surely Mother could not object. Valency had read it 4 times. She knew whole passages off by heart. And she almost thought she would go and see Dr. Trent about that queer pain around the heart. It had come rather often lately, and the palpitations were becoming annoying, not to speak of an occasional dizzy moment and a queer shortness of breath. But could she go to see him without telling anyone? It was a most daring thought. None of the Sterlings ever consulted a doctor without holding a family council and getting Uncle James's approval. Then, they went to Dr. Ambrose Marsh of Port Lawrence, who had married second cousin Adelaide Sterling. But Valency disliked Dr. Ambrose Marsh, and besides, she could not get to Port Lawrence, 15 miles away, without being taken there. She did not want anyone to know about her harm. There would be such a fuss made, and every member of the family would come down and talk it over, and advise her, and caution her, and warn her, and tell her horrible tales of great aunts and cousins 40 times removed, who had been just like that, and dropped dead without a moment's warning, my dear. Aunt Isabel would remember that she had always said Doss looked like a girl who would have heart trouble, so pinched and peaked always. And Uncle Wellington would take it as a personal insult, when no Sterling ever had heart disease before. And Georgiana would forebode in perfectly audible asides that poor dear little Doss isn't long for this world, I'm afraid. And Cousin Gladys would say, "Why, my heart has been like that for years," in a tone that implied no one else had any business even to have a heart. And Olive would merely look beautiful and superior and disgustingly healthy, as if to say, "Why all this fuss over a faded superfluity like Doss when you have me?" Valency felt that she couldn't tell anybody unless she had to. She felt quite sure that there was nothing at all seriously wrong with her heart, and no need of all the pother that would ensue if she mentioned it. She would just slip up, quietly, then see Dr. Trent that very day. As for his bill, she had the $200 that her father put in the bank for her the day she was born. She was never allowed to use even the interest of this, but she would secretly take out enough to pay Dr. Trent. Dr. Trent was a gruff, outspoken, absent-minded old fellow, but he was a recognized authority on heart disease, even if he were only a general practitioner in the out-of-world Deerwood. Dr. Trent was over 70, and there had been rumors that he meant to retire soon. None of the Sterling clan had ever gone to him since he had told Cousin Gladys 10 years before that her neuritis was all imaginary and that she enjoyed it. She couldn't patronize a doctor who insulted your first cousin once removed like that, not to mention that he was a Presbyterian when all the Sterlings went to the Anglican church. But Valency, between the devil of disloyalty to clan and the deep sea of fuss and clatter and advice, thought she would take a chance with the devil. Chapter 2. When Cousin Stickles knocked at her door, Valency knew it was 7:30, and she must get up. As long as she could remember, Cousin Stickles had knocked at her door at 7:30. Cousin Stickles and Mrs. Frederick Sterling had been up since 7, but Valency was allowed to lie abed half an hour longer because of a family tradition that she was delicate. Valency got up, though she hated getting up more this morning than ever she had had before. What was there to get up for? Another dreary day, like all the days that had preceded it, full of meaningless little tasks, joyless and unimportant, that benefited nobody. But if she did not get up at once, she would not be ready for breakfast at 8 o'clock. Hard and fast times for meal were the rule in Mrs. Sterling's household. Breakfast at 8, dinner at 1, supper at 6. Year in and year out. No excuses for being late were ever tolerated. So up Valency got, shivering. The room was bitterly cold, with the raw, penetrating chill of a wet May morning. The house would be cold all day. It was one of Mrs. Frederick's rules that no fires were necessary after the 24th of May. Meals were cooked on the little oil stove in the back porch, and though May might be icy and October frostbitten, no fires were lighted until the 21st of October by the calendar. On the 21st of October, Mrs. Frederick began cooking over the kitchen range and lighted a fire in the sitting room stove in the evenings. It was whispered about in the connection that late Frederick Sterling had caught the cold, which resulted in his death during Valency's first year of life, because Mrs. Frederick would not have a fire on the 20th of October. She lighted it the next day, but that was a day too late for Frederick Sterling. Valency took off and hung up in the closet her night dress of coarse, unbleached cotton, with high neck and long, tight sleeves. She put on undergarments of a similar nature, a dress of brown gingham, thick black stockings, and rubber-heeled boots. Of late years she had fallen into the habit of doing her hair with the shade of the window by the looking-glass pulled down. The lines on her face did not show so plainly then, but this morning she jerked the shade to the very top and looked at herself in the leprous mirror with a passionate determination to see herself as the world saw her. The result was rather dreadful. Even a beauty would have found that harsh, unsoftened sidelight trying. Valency saw straight black hair, short and thin, always lusterless despite the fact that she gave it 100 strokes of the brush, neither more or less, every night of her life, and faithfully rubbed Redfern's hair vigor into the roots, more lusterless than ever in its morning roughness. Fine, straight, black brows, a nose she had always felt was much too small, even for her small, three-cornered white face. A small, pale mouth that always fell open a trifle over little, pointed white teeth. A figure thin and flat-breasted, rather below the average height. She had somehow escaped the family high cheekbones, and her dark brown eyes, too soft and shadowy to be black. Apart from her eyes, she was neither pretty nor ugly, just insignificant looking, she concluded bitterly. How plain the lines around her eyes and mouth were in the merciless light. And never had her narrow white face looked so narrow and so white. She did her hair in a pompadour. Pompadours had long gone out of fashion, but they had been in when Valency first put her hair up, and Aunt Wellington had decided that she must always wear her hair so. It is the only way that becomes you. Your face is so small that you must add height to it by a pompadour effect, said Aunt Wellington, who always enunciated commonplaces as if uttering profound and important truths. Valency had hankered to do her hair pulled low over her forehead, with puffs above the ears, as Olive was wearing hers. But Aunt Wellington's dictum had such an effect on her that she never dared change her style of hairdressing again. But then, there were so many things Valency never dared to do. All her life, she had been afraid of something, she thought bitterly. From the very dawn of recollection, when she had been so horribly afraid of the big black bear that lived, so Cousin Stickles told her, in the closet under the stairs. And I always will be. I know it. I can't help it. I don't know what it would be like not to be afraid of something. Afraid of her mother's silky fits, afraid of offending Uncle Benjamin, afraid of becoming a target for Aunt Wellington's contempt, afraid of Aunt Isabel's biting comments, afraid of Uncle James's disapproval, afraid of offending the whole clan's opinions and prejudices, afraid of not keeping up appearances, afraid to say what she really thought of anything, afraid of poverty in her old age. Fear, fear, fear. She could never escape from it. It bound her and enmeshed her like a spider's web of steel. Only in her blue castle she could find temporary release. And this morning, Valency could not believe she had a blue castle. She would never be able to find it again. 29, unmarried, undesired. What had she to do with the fairy-like chatelaine of the blue castle? She would cut such childish nonsense out of her life forever and face reality unflinchingly. She turned from her unfriendly mirror and looked out. The ugliness of the view always struck her like a blow. The ragged fence, the tumble-down old carriage shop in the next lot, plastered with crude, violently colored advertisements. The grimly railway station beyond, with the awful derelicts that were always hanging around it, even at this early hour. In the pouring rain, everything looked worse than usual, especially the beastly advertisement. Keep that schoolgirl complexion. Valency had kept her schoolgirl complexion. That was just the trouble. There was not a gleam of beauty anywhere. Exactly like my life, thought Valency drearily. Her brief bitterness had passed. She accepted facts as resignedly as she had always accepted them. She was one of the people whom life always passes by. There was no altering that fact. In this mood, Valency went down for breakfast. Chapter 3. Breakfast was always the same. Oatmeal porridge, which Valency loathed, toast and tea, and 1 teaspoonful of marmalade. Mrs. Frederick thought 2 teaspoonfuls extravagant, but that did not matter to Valency, who hated marmalade too. The chilly, gloomy little dining room was chiller and gloomier than usual. The rain streamed down outside the window, departed sterlings in atrocious gilt frames, wider than pictures, glowered down from the walls. And yet Cousin Stickles wished Valancy many happy returns of the day. "Sit up straight, Doss," was all her mother said. Valancy sat up straight. She talked to her mother and Cousin Stickles of the things they always talked of. She never wondered what would happen if she tried to talk of something else. She knew. Therefore, she never did it. Mrs. Frederick was offended with Providence for sending a rainy day when she wanted to go to a picnic. So, she ate her breakfast in a sulky silence, for which Valancy was rather grateful. But Christine Stickles whined endlessly on, as usual, complaining about everything: the weather, the leak in the pantry, the price of oatmeal and butter. Valancy felt at once that she had buttered her toast too lavishly. The epidemic of mumps in Deerwood. Doss will be sure to catch them, she foreboded. Doss must not go anywhere she is likely to catch mumps, said Mrs. Frederick shortly. Valancy had never had mumps, or whooping cough, or chicken pox, or measles, or anything she should have had. Nothing but horrible colds every winter. Doss's winter colds were a sort of tradition in the family. Nothing, it seemed, could prevent her from catching them. Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles did their heroic best. One winter, they kept Valancy housed up from November to May in the warm sitting room. She was not even allowed to go to church. And Valancy took cold after cold and ended up with bronchitis in June. "None of my family were ever like that," said Mrs. Frederick, implying that it must be a Sterling tendency. "The Sterlings seldom take colds," said Cousin Stickles resentfully. She had been a Sterling. "I think," said Mrs. Frederick, "that if a person makes up her mind not to have colds, she will not have colds." So that was the trouble. It was all Valancy's own fault. But in this particular morning, Valancy's unbearable grievance was that she was called Doss. She had endured it for 29 years, and all at once she felt she could not endure it any longer. Her full name was Valancy Jane. Valancy Jane was rather terrible, but she liked Valancy, with its odd outland tang. It was always a wonder to Valancy that the Sterlings had allowed her to be so christened. She had been told that her maternal grandfather, old Amos Wansborough, had chosen the name for her. Her father had tacked on the Jane by way of civilizing it, and the whole connection got out the difficulty by nicknaming her Doss. She never got Valancy from anyone but outsiders. "Mother," she said timidly, "would you mind calling me Valancy after this? Doss seems so, I don't like it." Mrs. Frederick looked at her daughter in astonishment. She wore glasses with enormously strong lenses that gave her eyes a peculiarly disagreeable appearance. "What is the matter with Doss?" "It seems so childish," faltered Valancy. "Oh." Mrs. Frederick had been a Wansborough, and the Wansborough smile was not an asset. "I see. Well, it should suit you, then. You are childish enough in all conscience, my dear child." "I am 29, said the dear child desperately. "I wouldn't proclaim it from the housetops if I were you, dear," said Mrs. Frederick. 29. I had been married 9 years when I was 29. "I was married at 17, said Cousin Stickles proudly. Valancy looked at them furtively. Mrs. Frederick, except for those terrible glasses and the hooked nose that made her look more like a parrot than a parrot itself could look, was not ill-looking. At 20, she might have been quite pretty, but Cousin Stickles... And yet Christine Stickles had once been desirable in some men's eyes. Valancy felt that Cousin Stickles, with her broad, flat, wrinkled face, a mole right on the end of her dumpy nose, bristling hairs on her chin, wrinkled yellow neck, pale, protruding eyes, and thin, puckered mouth, had yet this advantage over her, this right to look down on her. And even yet, Cousin Stickles was necessary to Mrs. Frederick. Valancy wondered pitifully what it would be like to be wanted by someone, needed by someone. No one in the whole world needed her, or would miss anything from life if she dropped suddenly out of it. She was a disappointment to her mother. No one loved her. She had never so much as had a girlfriend. I haven't even a gift for friendship, she had once admitted to herself pitifully. Doss, you haven't eaten your crust, said Mrs. Frederick rebukingly. It rained all the forenoon without cessation. Valancy pieced a quilt. Valancy hated piecing quilts, and there was no need of it. The house was full of quilts. There were 3 big chests, packed with quilts in the attic. Mrs. Frederick had begun storing away quilts when Valancy was 17, and she kept on storing them, though it did not seem likely that Valancy would ever need them. But Valancy must be at work, and fancy work materials were too expensive. Idleness was a cardinal sin in the Sterling household. When Valancy had been a child, she had been made to write down every night, in a small, hated, black notebook, all the minutes she had spent in idleness that day. On Sundays, her mother made her tot them up and pray over them. On this particular forenoon of this day of destiny, Valancy spent only 10 minutes in idleness. At least, Mrs. Frederick and Cousin Stickles would have called it idleness. She went to her room to get a better thimble, and she opened Thistle Harvest Guilty at random. The woods are so human, wrote John Foster, that to know them, one must live with them. An occasional saunter through them, keeping to the well-trodden paths, will never admit us to their intimacy. If we wish to be friends, we must seek them out and win them by frequent, reverent visits at all hours, by morning, by noon, and by night. And at all seasons, in spring, in summer, in autumn, and winter. Otherwise, we can never really know them, and any pretense we may make to the contrary will never impose on them. They have their own effective way of keeping aliens at a distance and shutting their hearts to mere casual sightseers. It is of no use to seek the woods from any motive, except sheer love of them. They will find us out at once and hide all their sweet, old-world secrets from us. But if they know we come to them because we love them, they will be very kind to us and give us such treasures of beauty and delight as are not bought or sold in any marketplace. For the woods, when they give it all, give unstintedly, and hold nothing back from their true worshippers. We must go to them lovingly, humbly, patiently, watchfully, and we shall learn what poignant loveliness lurks in the wild places and silent intervals, lying under starshine and sunset. What cadences of unearthly music are harped on aged pine boughs, or crooned in copses of fir. What delicate savors exhale from mosses and ferns, in sunny, delicate corners, or on damp brooklands. What dreams and myths and legends of an older time haunt them. Then the immortal heart of the woods will beat against ours, and its subtle life will steal into our veins and make us its own forever, so that no matter where we go, or how widely we wander, we shall yet be drawn back to the forest and to find our most enduring kinship. Doss, called her mother, from the hall below. What are you doing all by yourself in that room? Valancy dropped Thistle Harvest like a hot coal and fled downstairs to her patches. But she felt the strange exhilaration of spirit that always came momentarily to her when she dipped into one of John Foster's books. Valancy did not know much about woods, except the haunted groves of oak and pine around her blue castle. but she had always secretly hankered after them, and a Foster book about woods was the next best thing to the woods themselves. At noon it stopped raining, but the sun did not come out until 3. Then Valency timidly said she thought she would go uptown. "What do you want to go uptown for?" demanded her mother. "I want to get a book from the library." "You got a book from the library only last week." "No, it was 4 weeks." 4 weeks? Nonsense. "Really it was, Mother." "You are mistaken. It cannot possibly have been more than 2 weeks. I dislike contradiction. I do not see what you want to get a book for anyhow. You waste too much time reading." "Of what value is my time?" asked Valency bitterly. "Doss, don't speak in that tone to me." "We need some tea," said Cousin Stickles. "She might go and get that if she wants a walk, though this damp weather is bad for colds." They argued the matter for 10 minutes longer, and finally, Mrs. Frederick agreed rather grudgingly that Valency might go. Thank you for listening to Sleepy. Good night.